It all began, dear reader, with an invitation to speak at a small conference in Athens. The topic, ironically enough, was the influence of ancient Greek thought on modern democracy. How could I resist? Upon my arrival, I was greeted by the host, a professor of philosophy at the local university, and a few eager students. An evening of wine and debate was arranged, and soon I found myself engaged in spirited discussions, my audience enraptured by my eloquence, or so I would like to think. The next morning, eager to explore the city that had birthed Western philosophy, I set off on a solitary excursion. My feet led me to the ruins of the ancient agora, where once the great thinkers had walked and debated. It was there that I stumbled upon a hidden passage, obscured by centuries of neglect. Curiosity piqued, I ventured inside, my journalist's instincts tingling with the promise of a unique story. The passage was dark and filled with echoes of a bygone era. My blind fumbling revealed intricate carvings and inscriptions, their meanings hidden to all but the most learned scholars. I pressed on, drawn by an inexplicable force, and then, in a chamber long forgotten by time, I found it, a door. It was adorned with symbols of Bacchus, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. I approached, knowing that I stood at the threshold of something extraordinary. You might think me mad, dear reader, but I could hear the voices of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle calling to me from across the ages. With a courage born of folly, I touched the portal. A vortex of energy engulfed me, and I was transported, quite literally, to the golden age of Athens. I began my exploration with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. The temples and statues, weathered by time but not by wisdom, seemed to beckon with ancient voices, inviting me to partake in the banquet of thought. At first the philosophers welcomed me with curiosity. Here was a stranger, an outsider, a modern man with a passion for their ancient ways. I joined their debates with gusto, diving into dialogues, sparring with ideas, drinking deeply from the well of knowledge. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize that the differences between us were not merely superficial, not merely the gap of time and space. They were fundamental, and they were growing. I spoke of individual rights, of the equality of man and woman, of the virtues of a secular state. They listened, but their eyes were not kind. Their smiles were polite, but their laughter was not. My ideas were not just foreign, they were, in their eyes, barbaric. My visions of democracy were flawed and impure. My concepts of justice were naive and simplistic. My arguments, once seen as intriguing, were now dismissed as the confused ramblings of a misguided mind. I tried to adapt, to learn, to understand their ways. I immersed myself in their culture, sought to see the world through their eyes. But the more I learned, the more alien I became. My very attempts to fit in only served to set me further apart. The grim reality began to dawn. I was not a guest in this golden age. I was an intruder. I was not a fellow philosopher. I was a barbarian. Even the simple pleasures turned against me. The wine that once tasted sweet became bitter. The food lost its flavor. The music, once melodic and sublime, now sounded discordant and harsh. The friends I thought I had made became distant and cold. The places I had frequented became unwelcoming. The streets that once felt like home now seemed strange and hostile. My every word was scrutinized, my every gesture judged. My every thought, once welcomed, was now suspect. The golden age of Athens had turned into a prison, and I, its unwilling inmate. And then came the accusations. Blasphemy, they called it. Sacrilege. Hubris. The very virtues I had extolled were turned against me, twisted into crimes. My trial was a farce, my defense a mockery. The judges were not impartial, they were accusers. The jury was not unbiased, they were witnesses. The verdict was not justice, it was a foregone conclusion. And so I was led away, not with the triumph of Socrates, but with the ignominy of a common criminal. The city that I had loved, the philosophers I had admired, the culture I had embraced, all turned their backs on me. The golden age of Athens had become a dark and dismal place, and I, its enthusiastic pilgrim, was now its sacrificial lamb. As I stood at the precipice, awaiting the executioner's blade, I realized that my dream had become a nightmare, my pursuit of wisdom a fool's errand. I had reached for the stars, only to fall into the abyss. My last thought as the axe fell was not of anger or despair, but of Johnny Walker Black and tragic irony. I had come to Athens to learn, only to die in ignorance. I had sought to be a philosopher, only to end as a headless barbarian.